At the core of right-to-work legislation lies the issue of white supremacy. It is the proto-fascist ideology to convince workers that subjugation is the pathway to freedom. But first, let's clarify what right-to-work means and how it affects unions. Suppose you work in a unionized environment in one of the 26 states that enforce right-to-work laws. In that case, you are not required to pay union dues while working there. This might seem fair on the surface. Employees shouldn't be forced to pay dues if they don't want to, but it does raise the important question about why business interests are so invested in allowing workers the option not to pay these dues. Historically, the National Labor Relations Act allowed for a closed shop, also known as a union shop. In such a shop, if you worked there, you were a union member and you paid union dues. And these dues are used to fund union staff who act as representatives for the workers, helping file grievances and negotiating contracts for better working conditions and pay. Being a not-for-profit organization, a union relies on these dues as its primary source of income to represent workers. The average amount of union dues is approximately 2% of a worker's pay, but it varies by organization to organization. By law, unions must obtain membership approval through a vote to increase dues, preventing arbitrary raises. In right-to-work states, even if workers choose to not join the union representatives are still legally obligated to represent them. Suppose a worker feels they have been inadequately represented due to bias or the fact that they're not part of the union. Well, they will file a charge against their union under the duty of fair representation with the National Labor Relations Board. As a result, time and resources are often spent addressing grievances for non-union workers. So what does any of this have to do with white supremacy? Well, as early as the late 1600s, the ruling class in the colonies was worried about maintaining racial separation to avoid being outnumbered. They employed tactics to incite poor whites against indigenous Americans and created policies in the Carolinas that prohibited free blacks from traveling to native territories. They also criminalized conversations between white owners and slave wenches in the provinces to limit biracial children and thereby protecting the purity of the white race. These actions not only established clear structural divisions in social status, they also served as the framework that organized American society. These situations continued with owners segregating workers based on race, ethnicity, and nationality. In the early 1900s, the Industrial Workers of the World, or the IWW, achieved notable success by organizing workers across racial and ethnic lines, including black organizers such as Ben Fletcher. This approach posed such a threat to the existing hierarchical order that the IWW was systematically dismantled. Over 120 union officials were imprisoned under the Espionage Act, supposedly for their opposition to World War I. By the end of the 1920s, this organization was barely operational. In 1935, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO, split from the American Federation of Labor, or the AFL, to change the status quo upheld by this labor aristocracy, which organized skilled craftspeople only. The CIO was highly successful in organizing with what was often referred to as unskilled workers. And once again, this organizing took place across racial lines. The central aspect of the capitalist structure is its reliance on atomization and the promotion of individualism rather than on class solidarity. When workers view their colleagues as competitors, they're less likely to unionize. Efforts to undermine the considerable progress made by organized labor began almost immediately after President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the National Labor Relations Act, which established the closed or union shop. This is where the concept of right to work became significant for policy and lobbying efforts. In 1936, Vance Muse co-founded the Christian American Association with Chairman Louis Valentine Ulrey. This organization was established to oppose wage equity and improved working conditions that arose from the growing influence of labor unions. Muse and Ulrey were particularly against Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, as Muse believed it threatened the racial order of the South. As a lobbyist for corporations and oil companies, Muse dedicated much of his time to fighting against women's suffrage and the prohibition of child labor. Ulrey, a geologist and occasional professor at Indiana State University, harbored intense disdain for various groups and ideologies, the likes of social liberals, political radicals, labor unions, internationally minded Jews, the NAACP, and the Child Labor Amendment, which he viewed as proponents of Red Russian communism. On Labor Day 1941, the Dallas Morning News published an editorial advocating for the prohibition of closed union shops. After meeting with the article's author, William Ruggles, who coined the term right to work, Muse launched his campaign. The group, which preferred to call itself simply Christian American, aimed to propose an amendment to the Constitution for an open shop, referring to it as the God-given right to work. Muse and his allies viewed the New Deal as part of a broader assault of Jewish Marxism on Christian free enterprise. Like many contemporary fascists today, Muse combined a vision of traditional American values with Christianity, framing his agenda as a defense of constitutional originalism and a ruling class that he portrayed as victims due to the spread of equity. The vigor and conviction behind this movement was sold as a fight to save the American way of life, quote, before it vanishes without a trace. Implemented first in Arkansas, one legislator stated that the amendment was an absolute necessity, quote, to stop the Southern Tenant Farmers Union among Negro farm workers, lest the rural Negroes be organized and wipe white people out overnight. To clarify any misconceptions of the truly horrific intentions of the Right to Work movement, Muse explicitly stated his purpose. Quote, white women and white men will be forced into organizations with black African apes, whom they will have to call brother or lose their jobs. They call me anti-Jew and anti-N-word. Listen, we like the N-word in his place. Our amendment helps the N-word. It does not discriminate against him. Good N-words, not those communist N-words. Today, with half the country implementing these policies on a state level, we have substantial data sets to examine their impact on workers. In right-to-work states, work-related fatalities and injuries are higher, average pay is lower, and access to benefits like health care is more difficult to obtain. Additionally, there are no significant differences in employment rates between states with right-to-work laws and those without, suggesting that right-to-work laws do not confer any advantages to workers. The only substantial benefit is to the owners in the inability to promote worker dignity and workplace democracy. The spirit of right-to-work laws remains unchanged from their previous iterations. They serve as a tactic to divide and individualize workers, ultimately benefiting employers and perpetuating a racial and class-based hierarchy that hinders grassroots movements aimed at improving quality of life. These anti-worker policies are often presented with fearful undertones, invoking an imaginary Marxist threat while fostering animosity towards equitable social standing. The promotion of free market ideals, constitutional originalism, and American Christian values seeks to evoke a nostalgia for an America that never truly existed, forming the basis of a proto-fascist ideology. While the ideology itself is deeply concerning, the most alarming aspect is how it is packaged and marketed to a working class as a form of salvation through subjugation.